technical difficulties. We'll have to fundraise to buy a new computer. Get this straight for next time. Some of you caught that, I appreciate it. My name is Kent Smith, and I have the honor of serving as Vice President for Student Affairs at Ohio University. I'm in my 6th year there, and this is my colleague, Katie Allgood.
I'm Katie Allgood. I'm the Director of Development for Student Affairs. I've been in this role for about 2 years now. And prior to that, I was working in annual giving at Ohio University.
Okay. So rather than come to you today with intended learning outcomes, what we thought we would do is actually get a feel for who was in the audience and quite frankly see what you want or hoping to get out of the session. We anticipated we may have some Chief Student Affairs officers. We anticipated we may have those who are just interested in fundraising. We thought we may have some people who are already doing some great things in fundraising. So we wanted to leverage what the audience was hoping to get out of it. So if you I'll take some notes. What were you hoping to get out of today's session?
Best practices.
Okay. Keep going. Can you?
Just throw things out.
Increasing revenue. We already do fundraising.
How intense is your fundraising program since you're already doing? Describe what it looks like.
I was just going to hear, we're not very intense.
I'm
We're
sorry.
not intense.
Okay.
Do you have a dedicated development
Yeah.
officer? Okay.
Others?
Low-hanging fruit.
Okay.
We like that.
Fundraising model.
Institutional politics.
Ooh. Speaking my language.
Working with departments.
Moving from ideas to fundraising to actually implementing them.
What was the one right before this one? Moving.
Working with departments, which is really important because we don't have typical graduates from student affairs.
And ideas?
Moving from ideas to implementation.
It was interesting, we went to a student affairs conference, development workshop at IUPUI, and we were actually the only people out of all the attendees who had a dedicated development officer for student affairs. So we really learned people are all over the board where this is concerned, and a lot of people, it's an idea, but they don't know how to go about actually getting a position filled. So.
And our presentation today is not designed to push to say you have to have a development officer in order to do fundraising. We recognize that not everyone either has the ability or the buy-in to get that done. So we will have some ideas that you'll see of some things that we think are very practical that probably most of you are doing or could do relatively easily. So hopefully you'll like those ideas, and we want to leverage the experience that's in the room as well. What were you hoping to get out of today?
I think there's a lot of etiquette around fundraising that I don't always understand. Like you can't walk up to somebody and say, "Give me a lot of money."
Right.
And so I don't even know where that would be recorded that I could find out what I should say to people.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. If you think of things you want to say or ask questions, feel free to ask us. We want this to be, we only have about 12 slides or so. We really want this to be an inclusive session where we can have a lot of conversation. By no means do we think we're perfect or experts in terms of fundraising. We have had some success. Katie, you're in your 2nd year with us, and we started this process about 3 years ago or so, and really being serious and committed to fundraising. So feel free to ask questions as you go and move along. And I guess what I'll start with, this will sound incredibly familiar to most of you, but I think back to my in particular college student personnel program and higher ed background, and one of the things that I quickly learned as a Chief Student Affairs Officer was that in the prep programs that I was a part of, and most of this way, they didn't talk a lot about the politics in terms of how political higher ed really is. Certainly didn't talk a lot. I took the higher ed law course, and I had a law professor who taught it and took several iterations of it. But a lot of what I do on a daily basis is being involved in legal decisions that have legal implications. And then the third part that has become one of the most critical is budget cutting. And so in my first 5 years of being a VP, I had to cut the budget every year. And so you quickly figure out, am I just going to keep taking this and keep hoping that we'll raise more fees, which you don't feel good about, because most of our money in student affairs on our campus comes from what's called a general fee, and that's where the budgets are funded. So on one hand, you're cutting budgets, but on the other hand, in order to get more money, you would have to raise the fees of students. And so I quickly figured out, after about 3 years in, around the second year, that I have to do something different. I have to create a different model for our division, and in particular, that's where fundraising came in for me. One, it just so happened that it was something that I was interested in. A lot of people have a fear. I had no idea what I was getting into, how we would get there, but I knew that we would have to raise money if we were going to be successful long term. I would have to change the model and truly start to do development work. Hence began sort of this exploration, speaking with other VPs, Chief Student Affairs Officers about fundraising, talking with our Vice President for advancement on campus to see what the opportunities were, which was pretty interesting early on. And so that's really how we began to have conversation about fundraising in student affairs. Also, and Katie will talk a little bit about this, like most institutions, several years ago we eliminated about 15 positions in the Division of Student Affairs. And while we had to take a series of budget cuts, one of the things we decided as a division was to cut deeper than we had to, because we knew the cuts would keep coming for several years. So we cut deeper, and while we cut 15 positions, one position in particular that we added is the Director of Development position. Rather than, and I had the luxury, I know as a Chief Student Affairs Officer, to make the decision that we would get into fundraising and basically use our own dollars, existing dollars, cut deeper, cut other positions, but created the Director of Development position. And we also added a coordinator level position for someone who would work with parents, because we knew long term that we saw parents as sort of what we call our affinity group in student affairs, who we would actually call on in terms of fundraising. Well, in order to call on people, you have to be supporting them. So I'll talk a little bit about that, because there are some people who say, well, there's no way you could call on a parent of a current student and they'll actually give you money on top of money that they're paying with tuition. Actually, we found a lot of success in calling on current parents. So I'll just throw you a headliner there. So take it away.
So back to what Dr. Smith was just saying, he eliminated 14, 15 positions and then hired me. So I was super popular when I first started out with student affairs, so that was a lot of fun. Basically, we figured that the folks in this room would have a very different variety of backgrounds as far as fundraising is concerned. So we just wanted to touch on some key terms that we're going to be throwing at you throughout this presentation. When we talk about fundraising, we're talking about the process of cultivating and soliciting contributions for a specific need or purpose from individuals, businesses, corporations, or foundations. As a development officer, we typically live and die by this cycle that you see right here. This is our fundraising cycle. Basically, we begin the process of fundraising by identifying who our prospects are. So that's identifying people who have an interest in the area that we're fundraising for, and also the capacity to make a gift at some level to that area. After we've identified our prospects, we're going to cultivate them. So we're going to get to know them a little bit. We're going to build our relationship with them. A lot of my colleagues in student affairs, when I first started, thought that meant I'm just going out and taking people to lunch and taking people to dinner on the university's dime and getting to travel and all this, but actually we're really building a relationship and identifying where their interest lies within student affairs, and then we're going to start to plug their interest in with some of the needs that we have and really just have those conversations so that we can get to the point where we're going to solicit them for a gift of some sort. And the goal is that if we've cultivated them well, the solicitation is going to be seamless. Sometimes they don't even realize that we're asking for money because they're so excited that we've been able to basically connect them with an area that they're interested in, with the need that we have, and it just makes sense. And then stewardship. That is a word that I had no idea what it meant for like my first 2 or 3 years working in the fundraising world, but basically that's the process of thanking our donors. It's also, being a good steward means that we're not going to accept a gift if we can't put it to use the way that the donor intended, and so that the university and the Division of Student Affairs is really going to benefit from it. So we're going to take gifts that make sense for us and that we know that we can be good stewards of, so that we can spend them responsibly. And then we're going to report out to those folks who have contributed to us to let them know what we've been able to do with their contributions.
So what was interesting here, as Katie began to educate me once she came on board, remember, not knowing about fundraising in particular, I would go out and I'd have meetings with parents, or parents would come to town and have a breakfast, or meeting with former student leaders who had graduated, they were coming back to campus, or even going out of state to visit with them as I was doing other things. And Katie, once she came on board, she said, well, that's cultivation. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, we can put that's contacts with potential donors that you're making. That's a part of the fundraising cycle. And so now it's really interesting at my perspective, while I'm still doing the similar things that I was doing before, it's one of those pieces where I now see that as part of the fundraising model. And I guarantee you, most of you in the room today are doing cultivation. You just may not see it in terms of cultivation. I would argue you're cultivating every day future donors for your institution just by helping students get a positive experience in undergrad. Because those who are most likely to give back to their institution once they graduate are those who have the positive experience. Well, guess what? 9 out of 10 alums, if you ask your most memorable experience, they're going to mention something that you're involved in on your campuses. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, because if you're having friction or people saying, oh, we can't spend any money to fundraise, or student affairs is not important enough to participate in fundraising, that's one of the fundamental arguments that you could be putting forward to show that you impact not only what current students are involved in, but certainly you impact the future fundraising opportunities to a large degree at your institution.
So as a fundraiser, we have to have a certain number of face-to-face visits with prospects on an annual basis. And so I'm very aware of when I've just had a visit with someone, because I'm going to go back and I'm going to type a contact report and log them so that counts toward my goals. So you would come in the office all the time and say, oh, I just had dinner with so-and-so last night. I'm like, I need to hear all about it, because we need to enter a contact report for that, because you just had a visit with that person. And so it's really, and we've actually been able to spread that throughout the division at this point, because we talk about it so much. I've had colleagues of mine, an assistant director of judiciaries, for example, met some guy at a football game at Miami University who's an OU alum, who wanted to be, he was involved in student affairs as a student, who wanted to be re-engaged, and so he gave me his name, and he helped me to open that door. And so, creating that understanding across the division is really important. So we're also going to just talk about a couple of key terms really quickly, just because we're going to be, again, throwing them at you pretty frequently throughout this presentation. Prospect, again, that's somebody who's been identified as somebody who has a particular interest in your area, as well as the capacity to make a gift of some sort to your area. We're talking about parents. When we talk about parents, we're talking about parents of students, whether those are current students, past students, or future students. When I started in student affairs, they gave me a prospect portfolio of people that when I say they, I mean Central Advancement. We have a prospect research team. They gave me a list of people that they thought would be excellent donors to our area. And our #1 most highly rated prospect was a parent whose son had graduated 11 years ago. And we went back, and so that's a parent of a past student, but I had to go back and say, this is not a good prospect for us. This kid's been out of school for 11 years. This parent is not going to care who we are or what our cause is at this point. Cultivating, again, that's just building a relationship. That's mainly what this job is. It's just building a relationship and getting people to know you and getting people to be familiar with the areas that you need support for, basically. Soliciting is the process by which we are asking people for support. At Ohio University, we always say that we're going to ask people for their time, their talent, or their treasure. A lot of times just getting people, we had a parent of a current student back, and he spoke in a class last week, and it blew him away. I mean, he was just wowed by the entire day, just because we invited him to come back and speak to a class. And eventually, we'll ask him for money, but, we started out by asking him for his time.
Would you tell them how we met that parent?
Sure. Actually, his son was having an issue of some sort.
His son was trying to get an internship with the San Antonio Spurs. I mean, this is a paid internship, but the professor in the class wouldn't let him sort of do an independent study. So he reached out to us. He sent an email saying, this is unbelievable, this is a travesty. My son has this great opportunity, it can be a life-changing experience, and this one class is stopping him. Well, we're student affairs, they're academic affairs. We reach out to the department chair and...
Well, you actually handle all that stuff about helping to get it so that this kid could go on this internship. But in the meantime, the dad replied and said, I own Bridal Formal, I own this large wedding store in Cincinnati, Ohio, actually one of the largest bridal stores in the country, and if you ever need anything, I'm here to help. So he forwarded that to me and said, find out, see what you can find out about this guy.
I asked her to do a rating on him,
Right.
leave a well screening to see, and lo and behold, Stimler came back in the $5 to $10 million range.
He's actually one of the most highly rated prospects that we have at Ohio University right now. And so that was just, a totally random way of identifying people, but that's how we've identified quite a few of the major gift prospects that we're working with at this point.
So think of all the opportunities you have where you've helped a student, you've helped a family. It's what you do every day. It's what we do. Those are opportunities to have prospects for the future. Now, I'm not saying you're looking at people as dollar signs. I know this can be tricky. You're not doing it because you see them as a dollar sign, but the reality is if they have a connection with you, they're more likely to give because they believe and know firsthand of the impact that you have on future students' lives.
So, and we've gone over some of these terms already, so stewardship, and then endowment versus spending account. This is something that I spend a lot of time educating people about in the world of student affairs because it's so confusing. So I'm just going to give you a very general definition of what these are. Basically, there are many different vehicles, many different ways that people can make gifts to institutions of higher education, but typically we're going to see people either establish an endowment or a spending account. So an endowment at Ohio University, somebody has to contribute a minimum of $15,000 to establish. And once an endowment's established, we're going to be living off the interest of that account. So if somebody opens an endowment that has $15,000 in it, we're going to have a couple hundred dollars a year to use from that account for whatever purpose the donor intended us to use it for.
Every institution has a different limit. So you want to check with your institution to see what the limit, what the minimum is to start an endowment.
We're actually getting ready to move up to $25,000, which is fun because I can tell everybody, you better give $15,000 right now, or next year you're going to have to do $25,000.
It's true, and it's worked.
And then a spending account, basically, if you open up a spending account, the money that's put into it can be used immediately. So we had a family that their son passed away on campus in the late 90s, and they've been supporting leadership programs. And we asked them if they would help us to bring the Leadership Catalyst program to our campus this year. So they actually gave us $5,000 for that program, and we literally used that money a month later and spent all of it, but brought that program to campus. And then you talk about stewarding, we had all 75 students that participated in that Catalyst program write them a handwritten thank you note, and I put them in a packet and mailed it off to them.
So this is an important point because one of the things Katie and I spend a lot of time going back and forth with, what do you want to raise money for and what's the intent? The majority of, me personally, of what I like to raise money for, I know how it felt, I'm sorry for sitting down with me, I know how it felt to walk into the position that I have and feel like I didn't have access to spending accounts. Pretty much what we were raising as a division prior to our arrival, we were spending. And so what I'm trying to do is set up the next person so that they have endowments, they'll have steady income coming in. So we have a pretty healthy balance between endowments and spending accounts. So one of the things that we've also done, though, is we had a couple of endowments that had like $3,000 in it, or one had very little money, and we've never touched in years. Was not in touch with the donor to tell them what we were doing with it because we weren't doing anything. So we've tried to spin down certain accounts so we don't have as many, we can be more consolidated. And now we've put a protocol in place where the department head who's responsible for spending the money has to be in touch with Katie so that we know that we have some more cultivation pieces and we're being in constant communication with the donor because that sometimes facilitates additional dollars coming your way when they see that the money is being well spent and that you're actually following up with it. Anything else? I know we spent a lot of time.
In
on
short,
this.
if our leadership center wants to use their foundation account, they fill out a form and talk with Dr. Smith and I about it. Ultimately, we'll typically let them use the money as long as they're being smart and using it in accordance with the guidelines. But then I know what they're doing with the money. So if I'm out talking with someone who supported that fund or somebody who's thinking about supporting it, I can give very specific, up-to-date examples of exactly what we've been using that foundation account for, which is incredible.
So this next one it's quick because I've spoken about most of it. Tell me some affinity groups that you think you have in student affairs in your departments, in your areas.
Student government,
Okay, student government.
RAs,
Okay,
sport clubs.
yeah.
Parties and sororities.
Yeah.
All right, Jay.
All right, Jay, did I miss one?
Past intramural participants.
Okay. Very good.
Those are all actually key areas to be tapped into.
Believe it or not, when we went to our student affairs fundraising training at IUPI, when this question was asked, nobody mentioned any of the things that you just mentioned. Kind of like, I don't know what an affinity group is with fundraising. So it's really interesting. If we really stop and think about it, I guarantee you, one or more, most, if not all, of those organizations you mentioned are doing some sort of community service or some type of philanthropy. Students are used to doing the work. What we've not done well with in student affairs is helping them to tie what they're doing with philanthropy with what we're doing in student affairs. To actually ask them to start to fundraise directly for what we're doing. Now, still do philanthropy and community service work, but they also can use their time, talent, and treasure to help us in terms of development work within student affairs. Number one reason people don't give is what?
Never asked.
They're not asked. Number one reason. And so if we don't ask our current students to consider giving, chances are they won't. Students not going to just come up to you and say, hey, can I give you some money today? Or can I fundraise some money for, and the beauty is, they could fundraise for student affairs, but still fundraise for something they believe in. How often are Greeks fundraising for not only outside charities, but for their organizations as well? Because they believe in it. We did, she'll talk a little bit about this, we did a golf scramble. Our first one was 2 years ago, and we had it was the first one for Greek Life?
Yep.
First one was for Greek Life, and it blew us away at how supportive they were. It's what they're used to.
9 of our Greek organizations actually sponsored a hole for $100, and then they volunteered to actually help run the thing. So.
And some played and brought their parents. So it's sometimes it's a matter of structuring it in a certain way to where we're at least asking. At a minimum, we definitely should be planting a seed that the expectation is for them to give back to the university in some capacity. We've started now talking about this at orientation. I get to talk to every parent and just about every student at orientation, and we now talk about the expectation that they have we believe they have an obligation of giving back to the university. And we didn't say give back financially. It's give back in whatever works for them. Not only do they have an obligation to make the university stronger and better, they have an obligation to give back. And so we're speaking with them directly about it. And I believe the fruit of our labor is starting to pay off. Our student body president came to me this year and said, Dr. Smith, I've set a goal for our administration, and I want to raise $5,000 for the university. I said, wow, how'd you come up with that? When we started talking, he said, well, I heard this from the time I was a freshman, and I've been hearing about fundraising efforts, and I believe it'll be easy for us to raise $5,000. And so now I brought in the VP for advancement, and we met with him, and now we're developing a plan. Actually, Katie was there as well. We're developing a plan to help them fundraise. So I'm actually encouraged to hear that you see those affinity groups. Now, for those of you who are tapping into those groups to actually fundraise for whatever it is you want to fundraise for, that may be something you want to think about, which is one of those opportunities.
Touching on affinity groups, again, we can also look at that not just on the current student side of things, but alumni as well. 9 times out of 10, when people who are involved in a club or an intramural sport, or they were an RA or what have you, they'll look back on their college experience and that's what they're going to think of. They're not necessarily going to think, well, I was a student in the College of Education. They're going to think, I was an RA in Biddle Hall, because that was a transformational student experience for them. And that's typically what they want to give back to. When they get a call from the phone-a-thon or a direct mail piece, it's going to be to raise money for the College of Education in all likelihood. We're trying to shift that culture so that if they're coded as an RA or a club sport participant in the system, we're actually going to solicit them for student affairs as opposed to And that goes back to politics, getting buy-in.
We'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that, but I just wanted to.
Are you housed in your foundation, or are you housed in student affairs?
That's a really good question, and I meant to touch on that. I have actually a dual report. So I report directly to Kent Smith, the Vice President for Student Affairs, and I also report to an Executive Director of Development in Advancement. So I have two bosses, actually, but it's great. I have a foot literally in both worlds. I attend all of the development meetings, and I attend all of the important student affairs meetings.
But what's really interesting is we pay her salary. And I was too green in the beginning when I started meeting with the VP for it. And this is where I'm being really frank with you. We started meeting with the VP for advancement. She said, hey, I want to have a development officer. Well, no, first of all, what you need to know about VPs for advancement of development, the more money we raise, it helps their bottom line that they raise. So they have a vested interest in us raising more money. So started meeting with them, told them I wanted to have, said, great, no problem, you have the funds? I said, yes. We hired the person. About a year and a half into this, I figured out, well, oh, that's right, you told me, the colleges all pay half of the person's salary. Actually, there are two development officers where the department is eating the salary and the other one is a half-time person. Like, wait a minute. But as I really thought about this, I have a lot more leeway because I'm paying her salary in terms of, hey, Katie, can you do this? Or here are my thoughts. It's a little bit different mindset. And then when you talk about the physical location of her office?
Oh, no, but,
Okay.
well, physical location is interesting too,
She was in our office the entire time up until you just moved a month
A
ago.
month ago. Now I'm housed in development, but I'm still right next to the building.
And it really worked out well because Katie didn't know student affairs before. And one of the, and I didn't know, that's right. And we should have seen, it was, I wouldn't say over the wall.
Every morning he would come into my office
True
and say,
story.
how much you raised today? Or how much are you gonna raise today? And I'd just be like, what did I get myself into? Because it doesn't necessarily work like that. You don't necessarily close a gift every single day.
And that's part of my learning curve. You know, it's just, and I was feeling the pressure of eliminated 15 positions. I hired somebody, not only at hire somebody, but at a higher salary than we normally start out a director at. So I felt like I had a lot on the line with our staff and our team, and I didn't want to lose our division. So I need to get some money in the door. And so it's really a great thing, but I really think early on, it is key for the person to start to understand what we do. The first couple of months, Katie literally went to just about every function that we had, met with every director numerous times, and began to understand what we do. And I remember when the light bulb started to go off, like, wow, you guys do more. I remember you saying, you do more than I ever had imagined. I didn't know student affairs did all of these things.
Well, it's interesting because the development officer, if they have a late dinner or something one night, they come in a little bit late the next day. And I thought that we were the only people on campus that had those kind of non-traditional hours. And I came to student affairs and there's an event every single night. And the staff members are, you know, in most cases getting paid very little, but they're working late into the night and they're back in their office the next morning because they need to meet with the students or whatever.
She's being really nice. This is one of our knockout drag-outs. Katie, you weren't here on time this morning. She's like, well, I worked late last night. I'm like, well, me too. We don't do that. We come in at 8 o'clock. It's kind of fun.
And my colleagues kept being like, well, you shouldn't have to be there at 8 in the morning because you're working. And I'm just like, well, everybody else is though. So it was just a really different kind of thing. And people also thought it was crazy that I had to patrol the streets for Halloween. And
We have a big Halloween celebration.
And I have to work commencement. I'm a development officer. What does that have to do with my job? But I'm a development officer in student affairs. And student affairs is paying my salary. So it's actually been really helpful for me to take part in those activities because my colleagues in student affairs really genuinely see me as a student affairs professional. No, go ahead.
And I really think this is one of those things where we will have to get stronger as a profession in the future. I think the days of, for those of you who are in states where money has stayed the same or increased, consider yourself fortunate because the overwhelming majority, or for those of you who are public institutions, it's just not that way. And I think, quite frankly, my role as a VP for Student Affairs has changed in the short time that I've been there. The Dean of Students our Dean of Students is Associate Vice President. He's now the person who's running the division day to day. And literally my job is to be cultivating and calling on people, and probably 60% of my job is now fundraising and doing that. We'll leave, matter of fact, at 6 o'clock, We have donors who live here in Chicago. Katie and I having dinner with a donor, two donors, a husband and wife, because they're both donors to our division, so it's part of that cultivation. It never ends. I mean, you really are cultivating everywhere that you go, and you become an ambassador in ways that you can't imagine. Because most of the students, they recognize you. The parents, they recognize what you do, and I promise you, you have far greater impact on the ability to raise money, probably than you even know to this point. And we'll talk a little bit about, making the ask and the importance. But again, any of you find that there's some angst about whether or not student affairs in your area should be doing this and why? Do you get some of that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Did the comment about the fact that you're cultivating future donors every day, did that resonate with you? And that's one of the things that people don't think about. Then you can use the whole, 85% of the students' matriculation time. We all use that. It's outside of the classroom. And a donor who's unhappy with the university or had a negative experience is less likely to give. I remember talking with our VP, and although he had an affinity, he knew a little bit about student affairs, our previous VP, because his wife worked in student affairs, so that was good fortune for us. He really didn't, it was kind of like, okay, we'll raise some money, kind of like whatever. But I think as he began to really understand the impact that we had on current students, and then as I started talking about future students, the light bulb started to go off. And where I really knew we had a winner was when he had me come and present to our foundation board, those are our big donors who give big bucks, who's running how big is our foundation? About 400 million?
No, we're hoping to get there through the campaign that we're hoping to get.
So I think we're 300 or 400,
yeah,
but we're in the
probably
$450 million capital campaign to add to that now.
Yes.
But you just have to find ways politically to gain that end for people to understand the impact that we have.
Have you had any issues with, not that they have a problem with you cultivating, they don't want you to collect? Because if you're collecting against another college or school or somebody else?
Not with the VP, because remember, the VP gets credit regardless of who collects it.
But I
Okay. And then I'll come back to, certainly we've had an issue with the deans.
it's an interesting role for me because my colleagues all work in an academic unit that they raise money for. I'm basically going out and talking to their alumni about my area. But what's helpful for me is early on we developed a system where our college student personnel graduates, for example, they're college of education graduates, so technically they should probably be their prospects, but they all work in the Division of Student Affairs throughout their time at Ohio University. So they're, I would argue, much more engaged with the Division of Student Affairs than with the College of Education. So what we've done is we're going to give the College of Education first crack at those people. They've got 2 years to get a gift from those people. If those people gave once and then didn't give for 2 years, or if they've never given and they've been out of school for at least 2 years, I get it back at them. And so that's when our direct mail pieces will start to go to those people, and the phone and calls for student affairs will start to pull the college student personnel people into those. And basically that's what we're doing with all of our groups. We have some people that have just always supported student affairs for one reason or another, and I get first crack at those people because that's the area that they support. But, we've had to kind of get fancy with who our prospects are and politically how we're going to, get the go-ahead to go and talk to those.
But you've also been smart. I mean, there are times where, I know at least twice, we've had donors who we were calling on, but they had an affinity for a college. So you learn pretty quickly, this is really about the university. It's not about being selfish that it's only student affairs. If somebody has an affinity for a college, where Katie goes and she's in wherever, Pennsylvania, meeting with someone, and they're talking about, I think I'd really like to give to this academic program. It made a big difference. Katie's not going to say, oh, you don't want to do that. Student affairs is where it is. She'll come back, reach out to that development officer and say, hey, this prospect mentioned this to me, you should reach out. Now, that might sound like, wow, you're giving donors away, but the irony is Katie's done that. I think you had 1 or 2 come back to us that way. They're out talking to somebody and they mentioned something student affairs related. So the key, I think, with fundraising is to remember it's about the greater good of the university and not necessarily the unit, although you are unit specific. But you'll find as long as the donor has the affinity, the key is to get them connected.
And just the fact that I participate in all of our development meetings meetings, people are getting a better understanding of what student affairs is. I'll be very honest with you and tell you that I bombed my first interview for this position as the Director of Development for Student Affairs because I was very prepared to talk about why I was ready to be a major gift officer, but I knew nothing about the Division of Student Affairs at Ohio University. So I had to go back and I had a little over a week to really do my homework and really try to understand what all falls under the Division of Student Affairs because it's gigantic and I had no idea. But now it's my job to get out there and educate my colleagues about what student affairs is and also educate our prospects about what student affairs is because it's not cut and dry. I mean, it's a big umbrella. We impact a lot of different areas on campus. But by getting people to understand what student affairs is, I'm seeing some of my colleagues come back with gifts from my area. Our planned gift officer, for example, contacted me about 2 months ago to tell me that we're going to be closing a planned gift of $120,000 for Greek life. And it's to establish 2 scholarships, a husband and a wife, one each lead a scholarship for the Greek organization that they were involved in as undergraduates. She thought to talk to them about that because when I first started, I had started working closely with some Beta Theta Pi alumni, which has since been booted off campus, but we will talk about that later. And I talked a lot about with my development colleagues about closing the scholarship and working with these people. And so they started to understand that's a potential area of interest for people is to give back to their Greek organization. And so just getting the understanding out there is helping money to come in from different areas besides just the work that I do.
Is there a particular fundraising software you use to manage your prospect or?
Yeah, we use BSR Advance.
And so the centralized office uses that so that way there's no competing if you,
That's right.
it avoids competing interests?
Absolutely, and our alumni association falls under advancement as well, so we all use the same alumni, the same database.
Yeah, and it's really a good question. I would highly advise that if you're going to start fundraising, do it in conjunction with your advancement or development office. They have a lot of, anytime we put information in about a meeting we've had or we want a wealth screen, there are a lot of things that we tie into that they're doing that quite honestly, if we went out and we were a lone wolf, it wouldn't work. We wouldn't be as successful as we could be.
And we'll touch on this, but when we give them lists of people that come through the division on an annual basis and they code those people in our database. So when we go to places like Chicago, I could say, can you give me a list of potential prospects that we might meet with in Chicago? And they'll pull on all that information. They'll pull people in the Chicago area that were RAs, that were involved in intramural sports, that were involved in Greek life. And then they'll see who has the capacity to potentially make a gift, and they'll give Dr. Smith and I a list of names of people that we should be out there talking to.
And you really want to have some fun, because I know you get these calls sometimes, and you make a decision, or some decision has been made, and you get this email that says, I'm never giving another dime to your university. And so far, it's happened about 5 times. I said, okay, go look them up. We had one that actually pledged the gift like 10 years ago and never fulfilled like a $100 gift, never gave the gift. That's always funny. Those I'm canceling all my money. I'm never giving again. Well, you never did. So it's really interesting how that works. That's the thing I saw another hand. No?
I think it was mine.
Okay, go ahead.
What about, is there reluctance from the other development officers to give up a contact? Because people want credit for that particular prospect. So how does that?
It's going to really vary from person to person and the institution. I started in leadership annual giving at Ohio University. So what I was doing was I was raising money on a lower level for all of the development officers that I work with now. And so I was fortunate that I was able to build a certain level of trust with them. That they trust me to go out and talk to their people, and they know I'm going to talk about their area and my area. But we've had many instances actually where Scripps College of Communication, for example, one of their major donors actually gives to student affairs as well. We've had several instances of this actually. We're all partnered with the development officer for different units, and we'll plan the ask together where they're probably going to get a substantial gift of maybe $1 million or something, but we'll tap into it and we'll have a $5,000 piece of that ask. And so they're going to ask for them to name a room in the Schoonover Center, but also to support the Fine Arts Series at $5,000 annually. So a lot of times we'll talk about dual asks, and student affairs will be a little piece of the pie, but it's still a piece of the pie that we wouldn't have had if we didn't have a development officer at all. And that gets us a foot in the door with that donor too. And that gets them to come to our events and get to know us a little bit better, and then hopefully they'll make a larger gift to us down the road.
And it's a really good question. It's about relationships. Just like it's relationships with the donor or potential donor, it's also about relationships with those who are doing the same thing, who are development officers as well. Katie's Allgood, one of the development officers, is now a donor for student affairs. One of our development officers on campus is now one of our his family owns a furniture store. Katie starts talking with him, she comes back, I was on the elevator with him, he told me nobody's ever talked to him about giving. I think we should talk to him. We invite him as partner to dinner, we start talking, next thing we know, we have $20,000 to $30,000 of furniture given to us in kind. And he's saying, nobody's ever called, nobody's ever asked me at the university before. And it's just interesting how you never know where that donor is going to come from. And here is a development officer at the university is now a donor for our division.
Plus, we can give people access that they can't get from other areas. You know, if they have a donor whose son or daughter is thinking about going to OU, I'll set them up with a meeting with the dean of students. We'll give them a personal campus tour. You know, we'll get them connected in a different way than they would have been able to without partnering with us. So.
Just real quick on that, I'm in career services and our governing body, the National Association of College Employers, has a new policy taken out where you can't give priority to employers that donate money. So just a little note that that's going to be a challenge.
To employers?
Yeah, so like an employer, like State Farm gives our campus $10,000.
Right.
We can't give them any priority on schedule or anything like that, so.
Very interesting.
It's something we don't like. It's driven by the smaller schools. So
When did that come out?
it was like early this summer.
Okay.
It's good to know.
Yes, it is, because we just started a corporate sponsorship program at Career Services,
Yeah.
so we're going to look at that.
Well, we're not buying by our campus.
I was wondering, how is it binding?
It is, that's the hardest part, it's just a policy. But if you found somebody that really likes rules, regs, it'd be hard to get past the first year. So.
Given your fundraising activities, have you seen from your current budget funds transferred to other units as a result?
Funds transferred to another unit
From your division?
that wasn't supposed to?
No, given your fundraising activities, your current budget, have you seen current funds transferred to other units?
Oh, because we were raising more? No, because we're all in the same predicament. We're all being cut. So if anything, we've seen an increase. I mean, to steal the thunder, basically we went from, our division had an annual phone-a-thon that's been going on probably 15, 20 years, where we're calling on some parents and parents of current students and former students, alums. And we were generating $50,000 to $100,000 at best in a given year. In year one, having Katie on board, we raised $300,000. So we tripled at a minimum what we were able to bring in year one. This year, our fundraising goal has gone from 300 to 350.
And we're actually 50% of the way there, and we haven't until June 30th.
Already this year, I mean, to give you a sense. So, and what's interesting is people start to recognize very quickly you're generating money. VP is happy, but don't think people don't look at those reports. Because right now, I think we're either second or third of any entity at the university in terms of percentage to goal today. Now, our goal is, there are two or three colleges that have a goal lower than ours. I mean, in the big colleges, they're raising hundreds of millions as a goal. But it's no small feat that we've gone from under 100 to 300 in 1 year having a development officer. And there was a lot of pre-work done, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But no, in fact, a lot of the money we're putting it into endowment. So a lot of it we're not even spending today. Some of it, and that's what Katie's pushing me a little bit. Look, you hired me, people are seeing my job, they need to feel that they can spend some money because they need to feel that this is having an impact on them now, which he's right about, versus saving all the money to spend for later until it builds up. So no one, not going unless you know something I don't know. No money has been taken away as a result. So here are some, we thought, practical ideas. We wanted to give you some practical things that we thought could be done because we know not everybody can go out tomorrow and hire a development officer. Not everybody has the buy-in or the money or the capacity to do that. So we wanted to give you some simple things that we think you can do. The first thing is know your institution. Know your institution not only from an operational standpoint. The point here is to know it financially and fundraising. Start to understand how much is your institution bringing in. Are you in the middle of a capital campaign? Is a capital campaign being planned? What's the history of giving within your division? Have you ever had a development officer? In our case, we had a development officer, but it was 7 to 10 years prior to my arrival that we had a development officer. So you knowing some of the history, and undoubtedly there was a bad parting of the ways, that some people, some of the long timers at the university, had still some negative vibes about our division and what was going on with development at the time. So basically, know your institution, do your homework, is the point there. So we give you an action plan. Before we even hired Katie, we basically developed an action plan of what we wanted to do. I appointed a committee that the Dean of Students chaired, and it was representative of every department within our division, and I asked them to recommend to me the 5 major things that we were going to fundraise for once we had a development officer in place. So they met for almost a year, and that can be a challenge, because when you put somebody from every department, everybody thinks their department is the most important department within the division. So for them, that's why it took them so long to come up with those 5. So literally, as we went out and had a search going on, we were able to say to the candidates, the committee has been meeting, here are the priorities for us. Now, it doesn't mean you're not going to fundraise for other things, but these are the top priorities that we definitely will raise money for. Because sometimes if you have the good fortune of a donor having a different feeling that I want to give money to this. And then you get into this interesting quandary of, okay, do I accept their money? Do I try to get them to adjust a little bit and fit into what we're trying to do? Or do I say, thanks, but it doesn't fit into what we're trying to do as a division? And luckily, none have moved on. We've gone, which one?
The veterans thing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we have turned one away. And this actually was $100,000.
120.
She thought I was nuts. Basically, we had one of the major donors for the university was giving like $15, $20 million to the university. One of his college roommates is someone who had just sold the company, but the university had not been in touch with since they graduated 20 years ago. So this major donor who has been giving wanted us to tap into his former roommate to get him to start giving. His affinity was veterans programs. Okay? Sounds great. That's a great thing. He wanted to give $100,000, and basically we had a dean of a college who wanted to take the money, wanted to partner with us. But my thing was, what's $100,000 going to get us? All you're going to do is tick this donor off. You're going to go and pay $40,000, $50,000 for a salary. You don't have anything planned. You're promising him the world, and it's not going to sustain itself. What's going to happen year 2 or 3 when you run out of money? Now you have a donor who's ticked off because you can't sustain it. So she's like, what do you mean we're not going to do this? So we opted out of it. They still went ahead with it. They've gotten credit for it, but the day of reckoning is coming. And
This guy wrote a check for $25,000 just to help them remodel the space, but he sent the check in April and there's still no space. Or really, I mean, we've kind of decided on where it might be. The position was supposed to be filled this fall. There's nobody in the position. So, we've got this donor who's a billionaire. He's got the potential to really change the face of the campaign that we're in right now. But we're not being good stewards of his gift by accepting money that we didn't have a plan for to implement. And now, if he were to come to campus and surprise us all next week and say, where's the space? Let's see it. It's not there.
And that same dean, I can't say I guarantee, but potentially the same dean who took the money, if we were in partnership and said, well, I thought Student Affairs was putting all this programmatic stuff together. And we've been there on some other issues, there was a whole lot of politics involved. And you talk about quickly getting on the wrong side of the radar. You have a donor, a potential multi-million-dollar donor who's former roommates with another one who's given mega money to the university. That impacts your president, your foundation board, and your board of trustees if you aren't doing things the right way. And so I totally forgot about that. That's a good point. It's one of the instances where we said, and if they ever come forward and they have a plan and financially how to make it work, okay. Part of my fear was, now to make this donor happy, I'd have to find money in our budget to make this keep working. And I wanted no part of that, because we didn't have the money. We're trying to raise money.
It was interesting as a development officer to say, no, give us $100,000. But I understand now, so it worked out.
Okay, so finding a niche. For us, I think and when I say niche, I'm not talking about student affairs or anything. What's the piece that your university or institution or division or department will be comfortable with you raising money for? Or who will your university be comfortable with you calling on? It just so happened for us, our university was not calling on parents and just had never done much by way of parents. And they thought, I think to a large degree, they thought we were nuts, that we wanted to call on parents. So to kind of paint a picture, we hired a dean of students who's a national expert in parenting programs. So I knew we had a parent program that was going to start and be phenomenal. And literally, it just so happened that our wonderful admissions folks, they're not in student affairs. We don't have enrollment management in student affairs, but our admissions folks have always allowed us to be the check-in. They saw it as, okay, student affairs is doing the work. So at orientation, student affairs, we're the ones who check in all the parents and families. Well, guess what? What a tremendous opportunity. What we started doing, because our university was comfortable with us calling on parents, we had no data to start with. We didn't have nobody to call on because we didn't have any information on parents. So at orientation now, when parents come to check in, first it was a form in the first year, and now it's electronic. The beauty of orientation is you could ask them anything, and they'll give it to you. So they're telling us their job, they're telling us their salary range. It's just a question, it's a little thing that they're filling out. And so now, on every parent who's at orientation, we have about bringing about 4,000 freshmen. So anywhere from 4,000 to a little over 8,000 sets of people that now we send through a wealth screening and development, and literally it comes back and they give us, here are the top prospects from this list. And the beauty is, we couldn't call on all those people if we wanted to. So now VP for Advancement is excited because he has an entirely new pool of people to go and call on. So our agreement is we have first dibs because we collect the data of who we want to call on, and then they disseminate it for the rest of the campus as well. So that's another one in terms of finding your niche. For us, we found that it was parents, and we're just starting now, and we'll talk about this in a second, with former student leaders on campus. That's about 5 minutes, that's 4:45.
Okay.
So a simple committee, I mentioned that piece. Determine who will raise the money. You know, that's an interesting piece. That seems really simplistic, but if you're not careful, departments start believing they're going to be out there raising money. And when you're first starting, you want to keep this pretty close to the vest so that you know you develop some consistency and some protocols. You don't want, there are some people you don't want calling to ask somebody for money. And some people it's just not a skill set. You want to keep it consistent. So what we've done is we've set up the protocols where literally departments make referrals to us, and Katie and I call on them. Now when we go and meet with them, we may bring one of the department personnel with us to go and call on them, but typically we're heavily involved in that conversation and how we reach out and those kinds of things.
That has not been an easy process
That's right.
for me, I'll tell you, as the development officer in student affairs, because our performing arts series, for example, it's been around for a while, and the woman who runs that department has also been around for, I think, maybe 20 years. And so her people are her people. She doesn't want me talking to them and scaring them off and, you know, alienating them by asking them for money. And so we've had heated conversations. It's been a really interesting relationship to build there so that she didn't feel threatened by me going out and talking to her people, and so that we could really get her involved in our process. And now we're at the point 2.5 years later where she just wrote a check for $500.
She's now, the director is now a donor who's bought into it.
We take her to do the tours of the auditorium where the shows are, and she, you know, gets so excited by showing people around and talking about her needs. And she was actually not comfortable at all with the idea of asking people for money. And now she'll sit around the table with me with prospects and talk about what the needs are. So it's really, and I brought her in on some of those meetings where I did it. I did the talking and she talked a little bit about their program, and I'm seeing a shift in her where she's getting more comfortable having those conversations.
Let's keep going. Transparency, I mentioned we cut a lot of positions at every divisional meeting, and we have something called a functional management team where it's all the department heads that meet. Whenever they meet, literally Katie is on the agenda to give an update of where we are in terms of fundraising, because I want them to understand what we're doing, how we're doing it. We've not mentioned as much some of the travel that we're doing. It was funny because this was early on in her tenure. I don't even remember where you were, in front of our student center, and Katie was talking to some of our junior staff members. And she's like, oh, Dr. Smith is in Washington, D.C., he's playing golf with a donor. And then one of the junior staff members figured she's out spending divisional money. So she came back. We have to really be careful because what they don't see is the ability to play golf with a donor, I'm now spending 4 to 5 hours of individual time with a key prospect and donor. In fact, the chair of our campaign steering committee for student affairs I developed a relationship with him through golf. He's a parent, not even an alum, parent of a current student who I started playing golf and lives in Washington, and lives in Virginia actually. And because of golf, we spend a lot of time together. And so something that's simple where it seems like you're spending money or you're going to dinner or you're doing these things, people who don't understand fundraising don't understand that that's part of cultivation, which is
And that
really
person's on
interesting.
my ask matrix for the year, by the way. We pretty much have a process in place where we're gonna try not to visit with somebody more than 2 or 3 times without identifying when we're gonna make an ask and what that ask is gonna be.
I guess we talked about
So we actually talked about a lot of this stuff. What happened when I first started in this position, there was no fundraiser, there hadn't been a fundraiser for 8 years, so just trying to identify who our prospects were going to be. And again, that was just the fact that you don't graduate necessarily from student affairs, so we don't have a natural constituency base, so I just took some time and identified who our people were. Again, they were student participants in the division, student staff, professional staff, and then we just worked to get those people coded in the database so that we could have research done on them, and so that we could reach out to them. Now, what was interesting, when I started in this position, I sat down with each department head and said, okay, what are you doing with people who give to your area? 9 times out of 10, they had no idea that people were giving to their area, or that money was coming in at all. And
which was our fault in the VP's office.
we were doing nothing to thank people, nothing. And we did have money coming in because the person that was in my role before built kind of an annual giving program where people did start giving, $50 or $100 a year to student affairs. And so right away, we identified, we created an acknowledgement letter process where I wrote a letter. And now I just pull a list of everybody monthly who gives to student affairs. We actually print it for people who give $100 or more. And Dr. Smith hand signs the letter. And in the letter, we say thank you for your gift to, and we include the designated area that they gave to, because a lot of people, again, don't know student affairs. And so they might think that they gave to a performing arts series, and if they see student affairs, without any mention of performing arts series, they're going to say, oh, my gift went to the wrong area.
And above a certain level, actually call the donor.
Right, right. And so right now, we're putting a process in that anybody gives $250 or more, we'll get a call from Dr. Smith or myself. And actually running those acknowledgement reports has helped us find a number of our major donors, because I'll run that report and be like, oh my gosh, some parent gave $1,000 to a student over the phone last night from a phone call.
And you want to freak somebody out. The night before they said they would give, and I'm calling them the next day, or Katie's calling them. I want to thank you for talking with our student last night. Your gift will make a tremendous difference. How do you know it that fast? This matters to us, because people who are affluent, believe it or not, most of them are used to giving. And frankly, they're used to being called upon for something, but most of them are not used to being thanked in a very personal way. So the more personal you can thank them and find ways to show them that their gift makes a difference. While $1,000 to us might seem like a lot of money, there are some donors that's nothing to them. But when they know it makes a difference, wow, okay, I might do $5,000 next time.
And I give lists to all the department heads when I run that report if money came into their area. I send them that list. So if they want to write a handwritten thank you note to the person, they can. Or if they want to pick up the phone and call, they can. So really any opportunity that we have.
So try to breeze through these. The first piece of advice, if you're interested in fundraising, I just challenge you to give. Become a giver yourself. I won't ask you to raise hands, but I ask you to consider being a donor, either to your undergraduate institution, your current institution. You want to start to understand how it feels to give, as to what your donors or potential donors will be feeling. So I would encourage you to actually give yourself. You'd be surprised what a payroll deduction will do. $5,000 gift is as simple as $82 a month for 5 years. And by the time you do it, it's pre-tax money. It's really about $50 to $60 out of your check. It's a great tax write-off. So just... No, it's not about a university, but it's something that simple, and sometimes it's planting a seed with current students. But I really think it's important for us to give back to whatever it is that we believe in. Quite often your donors will ask you, what do you give to? And you don't want the answer to be, well, I'm just raising money.
Not only donors, but your faculty and staff. I started giving to student affairs my first week in that office. And I remember when you were like, what are you going to give? And I said, I already do. I've been doing payroll deduction for months now. But he challenged me to go out and talk with all of our leadership staff and student affairs and ask them to make a gift, and I was so much more comfortable having those conversations with those people because I was giving too.
And our senior leadership team, they are all, and it's not a requirement, but they're all donors to the division. And the beauty is they choose what they want to give to. They each have chosen something different. And it's no limit or anything like that. They've chosen what they want to give and the amount into what function. Okay, so a couple other ideas. Tap into your student leaders. We mentioned that already. Identify the things that you have access to. I think we've talked a little bit about that. You feel comfortable with that one?
Well, I think that we should talk about, the Performing Arts Series falls under us, and so we've really identified that as an area we can really use to steward our people, not only our donors, but our prospects as well, people who haven't given yet. We've got Broadway shows, we've got concerts, we've got access to let these people meet these acts backstage after the shows. And we've got, so we work with the person who runs our Performing Arts Series, and now he tells us how many tickets we can have access to for each show. Dr. Smith and I will identify people who we've either given something substantial over the last couple of months or who we want to ask to give something substantial to. We offer them tickets to the shows.
Any of you have performing arts or different programs like, think of the concerts that you have. All of a sudden you take that as an opportunity to call on someone, or even our current donors. Hey, we just sent out a note we have a Young Frankenstein Broadway show coming, and we picked out, I think, five of our current donors, sent them a letter. Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for your continued support of our division. I'd like to offer you 2 complimentary tickets. It didn't cost us a dime. These are tickets that we had there anyway, probably not going to sell out. And they're calling, wow, this is so great, we really appreciate it. So something that simple. Concerts, you'd be surprised how when you recognize them. The local owner of McDonald's, we just had her in a football in the president's box last week. And I was sitting with her and I mentioned to Katie, one of the things she mentioned, we gave her, what were those tickets to Monet? Janelle Monet show. And literally, she's like, you have no idea, this is someone that's a multi-millionaire. You have no idea how much those tickets to the Janelle Monet show meant to us.
We're in Athens, Ohio, so people don't get out very much.
So it's really interesting. The point here is use what you have. It doesn't always take money to reward people or to cultivate people.
We're doing watch parties, and one of our donors owns an establishment uptown, and so Dr. Smith.
A restaurant.
He's doing
Football watch party with having. So when we got to choose the place, we decided to have it at his place. He's a donor to the division. He supported us wholeheartedly. So now we're giving back and spending money that we could have spent buying pizza and having it in the student center. It's sort of a reciprocal type thing. And now, we started tweeting that out that we did it one time. And then this company found out we were doing it. Now the company is sponsoring us. So we've upped the number of students who are going to the watch party, and he's making the money. So it's just interesting how you can tie those into each other.
I'm interested in some resources that you might recommend to help us identify things. Humility is a great virtue, but in this field, fundraising, it is probably a vice. Mm-hmm. So I just know there are a number of us who haven't really thought about this before. And
right.
We do have some things, but this concept of a worthy project that would be substantial enough that, are there any resources that you could recommend to help us start thinking about this differently?
Sure. We're still kind of identifying what those things are, and even just in casual conversations.
Because the challenge is every donor is different. One donor might react to a performing arts show in a very positive way. Another one, just speaking to a class, or coming and talking to current student leaders. You just got to figure out, the guy who we mentioned who's the bridal guy, he loves the performing arts, but we kept trying to tap into the performing arts. Well, he saw all of them in New York. So he didn't want to come to our little show that we were having. But the moment she talked about, we invite him to a football game. So that guy, he got to bring his son, and all of a sudden, this is how things could turn into something much larger. He has a daughter who's in high school, that now we gave her a specialized tour. He got to go to class with her of what a future professor in her major would be. It's all kind of tie-ins. He's now sitting in the president's box at the game, just going, oh, this has been the most incredible day. These students were so excited, and we've not asked him for a dime yet.
But President's Box and student affairs, typically have access to that sort of stuff without working closely with your development office. So, maybe inviting someone to come and speak to Student Senate, or arranging coffee and donuts in the morning and having somebody who was a former student leader come back and talk about how being a student leader on your campus impacted them. We have a leadership awards gala that used to just be a reception. For about, I think, 25 years it was a reception, and now it's a formal black tie
How
affair.
many of you are doing awards program annually? Okay? Do you raise money or do you spend money on that? Okay? We were doing the same thing. We've had this literally 24 years. This is a great example. Well, I think it's a great example because it's worked for us. 24 years we've had this program. We were spending $10,000 to $15,000 from our budget for the awards. We were begging students to come to it. It never sold out. We were begging them to come to this event. Okay, fast forward, I arrived. I'm looking at what we're spending. I had an experience actually when I lived in Cleveland. And we started another function there that we went into a fundraiser. So I wanted to do the same thing. And I wanted to turn it into a fundraiser where students had to pay and staff had to pay to go. And staff, what do you mean? You are nuts. Students would never pay to come to this event. So I said, well, I'm going to try. So we turned it into I think we used to call it just award ceremony. We turned it into, we started calling it the Leadership Gala. We sold it, made it black tie optional, made it fancy event. And in the first year, the event sold out 3 months in advance. And we got a committee, and the students voted that they would pay to attend. We used to spend $10,000 to $15,000 on this event. We now raise $20,000 without spending a dime.
Without a
from that
fundraiser, we were bringing in about $5,000 in
Good.
sponsorships just from the relationships that he had with people in town. Again, people he didn't typically, wouldn't have considered
That's right.
donors, who were actually donors and prospects to the division. And then I had a goal when I came on board, and so last year we raised $20,000 for this event in the form of sponsorships, table sponsorships, cocktail sponsorships, and now my goal this year is $25,000.
So the irony is most of the students never pay out of their pocket. The student organizations buy tables out from their budgets, and they get a tremendous discount. So it's a beautiful thing because we have sort of from the career services model, we bring in corporations and we give them, if you're a business area and you want access to the business students, you now sit at the table with business students and you get their resume. The students go to etiquette training before this formal dinner, so now they're practicing at a pre-function event, plus they go to the formal event and they're all dressed. I mean, it's like the #1 night now
And
that
then
students look forward
we'll
to.
ask a prospect of ours to be the keynote speaker. So
right.
now we're cultivating somebody through that process.
So the whole thing has transformed. So that's an idea. Just know if you put that out there, you will get pushback. Trust me on that one.
And you can call him on that.
But it can be successful. Okay, Parent Advisory Council. How many of you have Parent Advisory Councils within Student Affairs? If you hear nothing else today, I highly recommend that you start reaching out to parents. I can tell you, I'm a parent of a college student. My daughter's in Louisiana. She's a sophomore. I've never once heard from her university. And I can tell you as a parent, that's pretty interesting, especially a one who works in higher education. We started a Parent Advisory Council, and also our Dean of Students is in touch with parents through a newsletter at least once a month. Every parent at orientation gets the Dean of Students as well as my personal cell phone number. And believe it or not, they don't abuse it. I know you're fearful of the helicopter, the stellar parent, but I can tell you, the parents, when you start talking about what we do and how we do it and they have access, it's a lot easier to go out and talk about fundraising and what you do when they know they have an end to take care of their child. So I highly recommend that one. If you want to start simple, just work with your development office or pick 3 prospects, just 3 people. 3 people that you're going to cultivate for the next year. You're going to call them fairly consistently. You're going to communicate with them fairly consistently, and just stay in touch with them. Pick 3 people. And I think what you would find is that relationship will develop, and over time you'll get more comfortable with making the ask. One of the questions we're often asked is, how do you get to that point of making the ask? When you're nervous for the first one and that kind of thing. And I don't know if I just didn't know enough to be afraid. But in reality, I think what happens is if you cultivate the right way and do it the right way, it becomes a very comfortable thing, as Katie said earlier, where they're almost talking to you and say, so what are we going to talk about giving? You know, it's a weird thing that happens. So far, it's never been uncomfortable. It's been a nice threshold because I think we're going about it the right way. It's not a, hey, we're going to call you today and ask you for money next week. It's over time. I mean, the couple we're meeting with tonight, we probably have 3 years in.
Mm-hmm.
3
Yeah,
years
well,
in.
they were supporting student life before I was even here, so that's how I identified them in the first place. But now they're on our volunteer committee, so we're gonna ask them tonight to think about hosting some events in the area with some other student affairs people that we might want to invite to an event in Chicago. And
Very, very important piece here. This is critical, this part that's here. One of the things that we found, because we didn't have a development officer, and we weren't really doing development work in student affairs, none of our student leaders, all the groups you mentioned, the Greeks, the RAs, you name it, campus recreation, you name it, none of those people were coded in our advancement system as being in those affinity groups. So if we wanted to go and pull them, we couldn't. In fact, we couldn't. We had to go back to lists when Katie came on board and literally go look at plaques. I mean, true story, we had somebody go into plaques to take down names, and then we had to try to find people. Work with your advancement office and development office and get your current students coded in whatever affinity group that they're in. At a minimum, it's a way for you to call on them later to say, how you doing, or if you're having a reunion. But you're probably going to find this is a great way, if they're coded, to give you access to a list to start to call on. And it probably won't even occur to a lot of your vice presidents for advancement or development because they just don't think that way in terms of how important the affinity groups within student affairs really are. Anything else, Katie? Okay. We only mentioned IUPUI because this is one that we went to. They've actually started. I hope they're still continuing this. We went to the very first one. They did a fundraising workshop and training specifically for student affairs folks. And we went to the very first one and we thought it was very helpful. They're known nationally. They have a fundraising institute that's known nationally as being one of the best. And the former VP, who's the president, I forget at what institution, but she wanted to do one for student affairs. And it was really good. And if you want to get started, that's a really excellent way. We found it to be valuable.
he stopped coming in my office every day after that asking how much.
It's true. It's true story.
I value that.
So, and feel free to reach out to Katie, but there are some student affairs development officers around the country. I know there are not many of them, but I know Katie found it very helpful to reach out. I think you spoke with 3 or 4.
Absolutely, it's just helpful to know how they went about identifying their people, which I think this is the way, and people, it took some time to figure it out, but just identifying people, and then what areas have they been successful raising money for. I found across the board their LGBT center was actually where they were seeing a lot of money come in, because that was kind of a transformational office. It was a very important place for those people when they were students on campus. Now, unfortunately, when we were reorganized, that doesn't fall on us anymore. And I realized that about halfway through the meeting with that director.
Yes.
What kind of concerns do you have about accountability for that? I mean, I listened to your story about the donor and the facility, and they want to see some of that. What concerns do you have, or what kind of training do you provide so people are accountable for that money and that it's being appropriately used? Kind of the
That's
stewardship
really interesting,
thing.
and that's something that we actually haven't done very well as a university, and that's something that's very important to us. We don't take money from people unless if there's a process, a procedure, a plan in place. Everybody's on board with it. For example, somebody wants to do a memorial in one of our residence halls. They want to give us $1,000. We're going to pay $200 of that to hang a picture and a little plaque up. But we're really, I typed up a proposal for this. It's got to be vetted through many areas so that we really think about any possible implications that go along with that. Are we going to need to restore that at some point down the road? When do we move the artwork in that building? Is it always going to be able to hang in that spot? Who are the players? And we really are thoughtful. And development at Ohio University does not necessarily think that way. That's why I'm so fortunate that I've worked for Dr. Smith in the area that I've worked in, because we are thinking that way. But you have to make sure that you have all of the players sitting in those meetings to think about, 20 years from now, how is this going to impact us? We had a gift, my predecessor accepted a gift for $50,000 to name a lobby in perpetuity forever. And and we include these people on sponsors, 15 years later.
It's within student affairs.
We include these people on all of our performing arts documents as one of our main sponsors, and however many years ago, $50,000, over 10 years. affairs. So they were paying $10,000 a year. Anyway, we would never do that today.
So the key point is, resist the temptation to be overzealous to accept anything up front. You have to be very thoughtful and deliberate about what you will and won't accept money for. Because if you don't have anything, you sound $20,000, like, yeah. And I think our folks, that's how they were thinking is money, but now we're obligated for life.
Right.
Well, and my fear is that if someone would want to take money and you invest it for 2 years in pizza. I mean, which is, I think is fine if that's what was intended for, but if you don't have something to spend the money on, that would be my concern.
Well, and that's why when I go out and talk to donors, they tell me, this is what I want to use my money for. And I say, perfect, we're going to put that in the guidelines. Now, if that program ceased to exist, what should we have it go for? So, if our leadership center ceased to exist, it can go to leadership programming whatsoever under the student affairs umbrella.
Writing those agreements are very, very important. And we've spent a lot of time on that, and she's been really nice. But I know she's thought I'm nuts, and I guess a lot of people do think that. I am. So this is my friend, so I'll pay her back. But seriously, the gift agreements are very, very important in the work. You want to give yourself an out because anything could happen.
He made me meet with legal at one point. I was like, well, am I having to meet with legal? But just to make sure that what we're obligating, not only the division to, but to the university to, is something that's legal, it's something that we're able to do, it's something that we really can, we can give them what they're really asking for.
We have a chance for one more.
Do your auxiliary units fundraise?
Say it again?
Do your auxiliary units fundraise?
What unit?
Auxiliary?
Auxiliary? Actually, housing just started something. We're fortunate enough to have housing, and they just started a reunion for the RAs. Literally, that was more of a cultivation thing. It's the first time they've ever done it. How many did we get back?
I think we had about 60
people come back.
That's another program.
So it's starting to catch on. I mean, that's a lot of, 8,000 beds on campus. We have a lot of RAs, hundreds per year. And we've never been tapping into them. So it's just a matter of, they are, at least from a housing standpoint. And then campus recreation, where all the recreation sports, they are as well. In fact, they're one of our top donors. Because we were just in D.C. and just calling, we thought it was a cultivation at the end. The guy walking us to the corner, catch a cab, and he says, hey, I want to write a check by December. Now, it's only going to be a couple $100, but it's to the crew program. That's what he was in undergrad. He remembers buying a boat and having a tough time when he was in undergrad. But that'll start, and he's a 2008 grad. He's recent.
We meet with young alumni too, which typically student or development officers don't do. We do.
Do you feel like we've answered what some of you wanted? I'm just a little sensitive. I'm happy to step out, and we're happy to step out and talk with you some more. But they're trying to get in for the next session. Are we okay with what you were asking for?
Please feel free to email us if you'd like the PowerPoint slides or if you'd like to discuss further.
Katie, I was just going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say there is a listserv, a NASPA listserv. Are you on that?